Welcome back, Ascenders, to the Ascended Thoughts Podcast. I'm your host, Mystic Rain. Well, I've seen to have taken some time off from the podcast, and oops, I didn't mean to. I didn't actually have a plan to do that, and I have such a gap between the seasons. I blinked and a year had gone by, and I said, "Oh, well." I should probably make some content. For those of you that don't know, I have a beautiful life outside of content creation and social media. I have a profession and a job and other things that I do. And because of that, sometimes what ends up happening is that I will focus on one form of content creation and then forget about the other forms of content creation. Or to be quite honest with you, sometimes I just need a nap, and then the nap will last 365 days. And then by the time I wake up from the nap, I'm like, oh, well, but you know what? I am here now, and that is all that matters. So today, I wanted to talk to you all about fire. And a new way to look at it, a new way to look at its power, how it can be produced, and how to use it in your own life. And so, oftentimes in life, we may be in the process of trying to bring something in, of trying to manifest something, of trying to accomplish some type of goal or some type of aspiration for ourselves. And we will go through the process of what we call in this culture grinding, hustling, pounding the pavement. And we have all of these methods of essentially overworking ourselves, overburdening ourselves in order to make whatever thing that we're striving towards happen. And what a lot of us experience is that sometimes a lot of time will pass. And by a lot of time, I can mean that for some people, it can be years or a lifetime can pass. And that one particular thing that we were trying to bring into our reality doesn't actually manifest. And it feels like we are failing or that it's not meant to be. Sometimes you'll have a feeling in your heart space that this thing is supposed to happen for you, but then it's not happening. And then you go through this process of, oh my God, was I making it up? Was I dreaming? Like that vision that I thought that I had, was that not true? And then you start doubting yourself, your intuition, for some of you, your psychic abilities and your ability to perceive. You start thinking that you did it incorrectly, that somehow, some way, you got the message wrong. And so what I want to bring into this space is my fire story, right? So when we think about starting a fire, right? If you were ever out in the wilderness and you got stuck, one of the first things that we think about outside of like food and water is heat, a fire source, right? You find water, you still got to boil it. You find a source of food, you still got to cook it. You need a fire. And then what happens is that people go, okay, well, let me find 2 sticks and let me just rub them together. And then you start rubbing them together, and there's so much force that we use to try to start this fire. Now, mind you, I am not a survivalist, nor have I ever rubbed 2 sticks together, nor do I hope to ever be in a position in a life where I have to rub two sticks together, but I have watched a fair amount of Discovery Channel, okay? And also a fair amount of Naked and Afraid. And so I have, a very cursory understanding of like the process. And so, but what I've seen is the two people rubbing two sticks together, and there's so much force that goes into the process of doing that the rubbing of the two sticks together turns into like this act of like resistance. You're supposed to be starting this fire, but somehow, some way, people oftentimes end up working against nature rather than working with nature. Because when you see true survivalists start a fire, and again, right, I'm just talking about things that I've seen on television, right? When you watch a true survivalist start a fire and they start rubbing their sticks together, the resistance and the force, they don't display that. There is a sort of dance that happens with nature in order to start this fire, but forcing it isn't necessary. And what a lot of people are doing when they're trying to manifest something into their reality, bring in a goal into their reality, they are forcing two sticks together. And by that forcing of the two sticks together, there is this act of resistance. The thing about life and how it unfolds is that life will always unfold using the path of least resistance. And so when you think about your life and you think about those moments where you're like, whoa, how did that happen? Or, whoa, like this is great, but I had no idea it would happen, or I had no idea it would happen to me in this kind of way, or, oh my God, I got this crazy story to share. Isn't it crazy that it happened like that? It's because it used the path of least resistance. And the thing with the path of the least resistance is that it's a path that your physical, logical mind is incapable of understanding, which is why you never have the answer. That is why when it does finally unfold, you're always left with a feeling of pleasant surprise because you couldn't see it. The path of least resistance, a lot of times, is not logical by what we view as logic. Because we have to remember that in this society, the way our brain is trained, we think that working really hard means that you get a lot of money or a lot of reward or a substantial payoff, when some of the hardest workers are the poorest. The people that work the least are the ones that make the most oftentimes, right? Like when you're thinking about your millionaires and your billionaires and different things like that. And so logically, if we say, well, logically, this is the thing I should do because this will be the easiest path to get there, you can probably guarantee yourself that whatever you just came up with is in fact not the path of least resistance and is possibly one of the two sticks that you're about to start rubbing together, because the path of least resistance doesn't make any sense, right? I will give you an example. One time in my life, I remember going, oh, you know what? I really want to take this trip, but the trip that I had wanted to take, I had wanted specifically to go on like the specific cruise ship, right? I wanted the suite. So I didn't want like a regular cabin. I wanted to be in the suite. The suite was a minimum of like $10,000 for like for like the 3-night cruise. And I knew I wanted the suite, and I knew I wanted like a 5 to 7 day cruise. I knew that I wanted to fly first class there and back. I knew that I wanted like a chauffeur. I knew that I wanted to spend a few days in the port city of Miami, and I wanted to be in a really nice hotel and a suite. Like I knew I wanted these things, but I was like, oh gosh, well, that's going to be a bill, right? I had been in a position where I was like, is it my time in my life to like maybe start trying to look for a house to buy, on account of the fact that if you don't bite now, it seems like you may not be able to bite, right? Then I was like, oh, I also kind of want a new car. I was going over all these things that I wanted to buy, that I had wanted to use money for. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to generate that money. And so I had like all these ideas about different sort of like business ideas, different sort of side hustle ideas, and a way to sort of like generate the money, potentially. What about another job? Different things like that. Like where can I go to get my hands on the resources type things? Because that's how I want to take this trip, and that's how I want to get the car and like whatever. And then, so I was saying to Spirit, all right, Spirit, like, come on, man, I need your help. And then when talking to Spirit, I've always sort of been like, I don't necessarily think that I need to work hard to get a lot of money. Now, when I say that, like, I mean, like, I believe, for example, if you get a muggle job, that you can have a good muggle job that's a solid gig where you don't feel burnt out from the work that you have to do, where there's work-life balance, and you're also making a substantial amount of money, right? I believe that all of that is possible. I believe that you don't have to work to make money, because there's a lot of people that don't work who have a steady source of income, right? And so these are belief systems that I hold and that I carry. And so me walking around with all of that, right, which is funny now because I recognize that actually those are very complex thoughts in the sense that I'm not entirely sure that they all kind of align with each other. But whatever, this is the belief system that I was walking with. And then so Spirit was like, okay, cool. At that time, I had a job that wasn't really feeding my soul, and, you know, my health was going downhill fast, and my blood pressure was crazy high, and I had all these panic attacks because there was just this job that I had that it just wasn't feeding my soul, and it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't a pleasant environment to be in, and, you know, I didn't like it, right? And I was like battling with that, because at one point in time I did like it. And so coming to terms and sort of grieving this opportunity that I had once really loved, but realized I was no longer in alignment with my new perspective and all that kind of stuff. And then, but at the same time, I'm also wanting all these new things. And so what ended up happening was that, like, I wasn't leaving on my own, because in my mind, it's like, well, how do you walk away from such a substantial resource where you're making good money, right? And like, why would you walk away from all of that? Yet I had this idea of all these other things that I wanted. And then the trip in the car and the house, like, that was just something that, like, I was thinking about, but I was still in a place of like wanting this bigger expansion of life and wanting to experience more of life. And for me, I put money and those things together. Not everyone does, but I do, right? And so one day, and I remember like waking up going, oh, this feels like it's about to end. Like, this journey here with this job feels like it's about to end. That feeling made me really uncomfortable, because I was like, this is my resources. Like, I get a lot of my resources from here. Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then, but I heard Spirit being like, it's good, it's fine. And I was like, oh my God, but if I lose my job, then like oh my God, like my life, like what happens with life? Like, it's like my life is ending. And then Spirit very much so was like, that's not true. It's like just a job. It's not that big of a deal, right? Anyway, long story short, there was a day I got in the car. I was so sick to my stomach because I was like, oh, I have to go to this place. I have to go to this job. I don't like this job, right? Like, I gotta go see these people. They're smiling in my face. I gotta smile in their face and play the game. And I just felt absolutely miserable. Anyway, so I get in the car. I'm on the highway. I'm driving to the job. And I kid you not, I saw like 15 rainbows in the sky, 15. Some of them were in the shape of a rainbow. Some of them were straight, but all of them had the colors in it. And I remember looking around me at the other cars around me, because I'm like, is anybody else seeing what I'm seeing in the sky? That day, it was a beautiful sunny day. There were no clouds in the sky. It hadn't rained that day, and it didn't rain the day before. Yet there's like 15 rainbows in the sky. And as I'm looking around at all these drivers, I can tell nobody is noticing what I'm noticing. And I'll never forget where I was like, this feels very much so like the last day of this job. Sure enough, I got to the office, and sure enough, it was the last day of that job. But the funniest thing that ended up happening was it was the last day of that job, but because of the situation, like how it happened, and essentially what it was I essentially ended up getting laid off, right? And but there was a nice check that came with being laid off. And I was distraught. Like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Like, it's so close to the holidays. I'm about to get married. This is not the time to like be down a job. This is awful. Like, what am I gonna do? And then so I like wallowed in that for a little bit. And then I was like, okay, let me just get through Christmas. Let me try to enjoy that. People don't hire around Christmas. They're like often anyway. So if you try to start applying now, you're just going to bum yourself out because it's not going to work the way you want it to work. And so just get through the holidays. When January comes, you're going to put on your big girl panties, and then you're going to start the process of looking for a job. So I started the process of looking for a job a week into January. Within 30 days, not only did I have a job and was fully gainfully employed, I had a higher salary and a higher title than I had from the job that I left. Not only that, I had a really beautiful check. And this check not only covered my first class trip, it covered, if I wanted to, part of the down payment for a new house, and then also another car if I actually wanted to. I had all of that and then some, plus a new job that was calmer, that was less work, that was more money, that was a higher title. I got to work from home there and didn't have all of the aggravation from a previous job. I walked away with more money, more resources, and all of the things that I wanted, with all of the boxes being checked and then some. And in order for me to get that, I had to lose my job. The interesting thing about that is that not working is actually the path of least resistance. I didn't work for 3 months and I had more money than I had previously. Because I was working, I now had 2 sources of muggle income, right? And big income too. Like, we're talking like, in terms of salaries, we're talking like a 6-figure salary from the new job and a previous 6-figure salary, that, like that kind of thing. Like, there was like money that was flowing and I was like, whoa. And it was coming in and I wasn't working. I was sleeping in until 10:30 a.m. Right? I was going to bed at 2-3 o'clock because I'm sitting there watching YouTube videos. Okay. And I spent the first half of that 3 months panicking when I should have just been enjoying and living the life. Because in that scenario, if I want the resources to do the things that I had wanted to do, the path of least resistance is to just simply accept the resources and then go sit down somewhere. If Spirit said to me, yo, listen, we've got this idea, right? Like, okay, we got your list of things you want. We know exactly how to get it to you. We know the fastest way to get it to you. And we know how to get it to you in a way where you have to do nothing. I would have been like, holy crap, what is it? Spirit would have said, well, you got to lose your job. I would have been like, absolutely not. I am not. First of all, to be quite honest with you, I would have thought that I was sitting there talking to demons or something. I'd have been like, this is not Spirit. This is not the word of God. I've heard it wrong. Something is wrong with my translation. And then I would have did everything in my power to prevent that from happening. I would have did everything in my power to prevent losing my job, because that is what you would do. You would naturally go into this survival mode of like, no, I have to keep this thing. Like, what do you mean I'm going to lose my job? I'm sitting here going into a new year. Like, I'm getting married. Like, what? Plus, like, I want these things. Like, I want to, like, I thought I was going to manifest this beautiful trip. And what do you mean? And now I have no job. I have like no source of income. And what I've learned is that just because you don't necessarily have a job doesn't mean that you don't necessarily have a source of income. And I had to learn, why did you put those two things together when you are now being shown that that's actually not true, and that jobs aren't necessarily always connected to the source of income. Now, are they usually? Absolutely. But are there more creative ways for something to happen? Absolutely. And I recognized that if spirit told me that that was the plan, if my higher self told me that that was the plan, my physical, logical mind would have not had the ability to understand it, to comprehend it, and it damn sure would not have respected it. I would have not accepted that that would have been the situation. I would have not accepted losing my job. At no point in time would I said, you know what, spirit, that's a great idea. I'm gonna be a willing participant to that. And I'm just gonna allow myself to lose it. Like, that just would not have happened. I would have fought the entire way through. And then suddenly, the path of least resistance would have turned into the path of the most amount of resistance, because I would have been in there resisting it and resisting it hard. It required for me to be in the dark. And when I was going through that phase, right before it happened, I remember feeling and sensing that like my life was changing and not really knowing what it was, but knowing that what I currently had in my life no longer matched my new perspective. And because it was no longer matching my new perspective, I didn't have the perspective required to hang on to that reality. That reality started to sort of fall apart. The pieces started to fall away because my perspective was no longer supporting that reality. And it needed to fall away because my new perspective was trying to build the reality that I now saw through my new perspective. But some things had to leave. And I said people, places, and things. That was some people, and that was also some places, and it also was a thing. But it turned out to be the path of least resistance. And not only did I get everything that I actually wanted, the whole process took 30 days before I was back to like restored normal, number one. And within that time period, nothing was hurt. Nothing was touched monetarily. Everything was fine. Everything was like the status quo, like nothing had changed. And on top of that, I learned what it felt like to go to brunch on like Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning and Thursday morning. And I suddenly went to brunch and lunch like 3 to 4 times a week. I learned what it felt like to frolic. I learned frolicking. I started to frolic. I would just get in a car and my husband and I would be like, let's just go somewhere. And then we would like end up 3 states away. I got to a point where I learned how to experience different aspects of living. And through that, that's when I started to learn and understand that you can't know everything, because if you know everything that's going to happen, then you do this thing where even when you don't want to, you start rubbing 2 sticks together trying to force a fire, because you're like, no, it has to happen this way. It has to be done in this kind of way, versus allowing things to simply happen. And to us, when things simply happen, we call that spontaneity. Now, from like a universe perspective, that's not really the case because everything already has a plan and a path. But for our mind, we call that spontaneity, right? But think about like a wildfire of a fire. And like in the wild, in a forest, sometimes fires just happen, right? They just start, right? Through an act of spontaneous combustion, right? It just kind of happens. But when it does just happen, think about how powerful that fire is and how hard it is to put it out. It is harder to put out a wildfire, a fire that just spontaneously combusted, than it seems to be to put out any other kind of fire, a fire that was forced by 2 sticks, right? And that fire, that wildfire that was spontaneous, it burns longer, it burns hotter, it burns brighter. And that is what life is. That is the path of least resistance. Why did the fire start? Well, maybe, okay, it was dry, right? But maybe it simply too was time. Maybe it just needed to, or maybe there wasn't a reason. Maybe it was just an act of spontaneity, and then boom. And now you have this roaring fire that's super hot, super powerful, and way more powerful than what you would have ever had the ability to create by forcing 2 sticks together. And that's life. the path that I took to get exactly what I wanted to have, that path of least resistance, had to be something to spark. Because I could have rubbed two sticks together, but I wouldn't have walked away with exactly what I wanted. How fast I walked away with it if I did go that route. It would have took longer. I probably would have been a lot more tired, a lot more overworked, because I would have taken on more work thinking that that would have been what was needed or required to get the resources, right? In my mind, I would have told a cute little story about how, oh, it's not that much more work. It's just me doing the work necessary to manifest, right? Instead of doing absolutely nothing. Because in this particular circumstance, absolutely nothing was done, and I walked away with everything that I actually wanted to have by doing absolutely nothing. And through that process, by doing nothing, life was able to unfold using the path of least resistance, which is also utilizing aspects of spontaneity, because spontaneity is creative, right? And the creation loves the creative. And then instead of me intervening and being a part of the process, forcing two sticks together, that beautiful act of spontaneous combustion was able to occur. And with that, I got a much more powerful fire that burned hotter and brighter and longer than I would have gotten if I tried to make my own. Sometimes in life, you just need to allow things to spark on its own, to spontaneously combust on its own. When you look at different times in your life where you're like, oh, that was wild. Like, how did that happen? I don't know how it happened, but that was wild. I welcome it. I love it. That was great. Or when people have times in their life where they were going in one direction, they knew that it wasn't really working for them. And then maybe they go, you know what? I'm actually going to step out on faith. And this actually does happen a lot in the job world. This is where a lot of examples actually exist, where people go, I just know that this isn't it for me. I don't know what's on the other side for it. And so people just quit, right? A lot of times people will just quit and they don't really have a plan. But in that moment, they decided to just do nothing. In that moment, they decided to just sit still, right? Like when you don't know what to do, you sit still. They just decided to sit still. And it's through being still when you're not interacting with the world, you are also at the same time not resisting, because sometimes our movements are acts of resistance, but we just don't know it yet because we don't have all the information, right? And so we're not resisting, and when we're in that space of not resisting and we're not blocking all aspects of our energetic field because we just simply decided to sit still, then suddenly there's this beautiful thing that happens in the forest. An act of spontaneous combustion where things light up. And then those people talk about, and this happened, and this happened, and I got this opportunity, and isn't that crazy? Because now your life is experiencing the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance, as counterintuitive as it feels, is doing nothing sometimes. Of sitting still, of simply allowing life to unfold. And the reason why you can do this is because you've already chosen what you wanted to do before incarnation. So there are some things that you do. There's some things that require inspired action, right? Like, for example, let's say you want a business. Well, you do need some form of legal entity. Like, are you at least at a minimum going to file the paperwork to establish the LLC? Because spirit can't do that part for you, right? Are you going to contact a bank and to open an account for that money that you want to flow into you, right? Because spirit can't do that part for you. So there are parts of that you need to do through inspired action to help facilitate the manifestation process. But whenever you reach a point where you're like, I don't know what's next, that's just because you don't need to know. Because the rest of it will play out through an act of spontaneous combustion, through an act of unfolding. And all you have to do is sometimes just sit still and allow it to happen. And know that, like, why does it happen? The same reason why there's fires, wildfires. Sometimes it just happens, right? Sometimes that is the reason. When you think about people who get famous, the story that the majority of them have, when you say, what happened? The majority of them say, I don't know. Just, I woke up one day and boom. That was their act of spontaneous combustion, right? And a lot of times it happens to people too, who they were like, look, I was pounding the pavement. I was working so hard. Nothing was happening. I was at it for years and years and years. 10 years I was at it. And then I gave up. And then when I gave up, they had a phone call, somebody saw them on the internet, whatever. They ran into somebody at a Starbucks that gave them the break, and then boom, the act of spontaneous combustion happened, and then they became famous. And the reason for it is because them quitting, it wasn't that they needed to quit. It wasn't that they were supposed to give up. It was just that for that particular person, it took the act of giving up for them to move out of the way and stop forcing two sticks together, stop creating resistance. They had to step aside in order to simply allow life to unfold. And life unfolds through spontaneity, spontaneous combustion. And when they were no longer blocking their energetic field, it was able to happen. And that's why so many of the stories of how people get famous, they're like, I had no idea how this shit worked out. That was crazy to me. It's because they stopped resisting. And a lot of times that just means doing nothing. Because if you would have told me that, like, oh yeah, you'll get all those things, but you have to lose your job, I would have been like, ha, you're funny. You're funny. Like, what? No. Like, you're not talking to me. Because it feels counterintuitive. It doesn't match what the logical brain has been taught and trained to do, right? The logical brain, our physical brain, is taught and trained to do something all of the time. And then we're taught that if we don't do something all of the time, that we will not be rewarded because we put in no effort. But metaphysical laws just don't work like that. They don't follow the same bullshit logic that humans have found a way to come up with. And you can see it in all aspects of the animal kingdom. Some of you guys have cute little chihuahuas who live a life of luxury because of you. That chihuahua has done absolutely nothing but exist and take naps all damn day. And they've got the best food and the most comfortable orthopedic bed. They go with you everywhere on trips. You got chihuahuas sitting in first class, and they didn't go to work. Every animal in the animal kingdom has everything it needs and more. And it's only humans who have convinced themselves that we are somehow the smartest of all the animals on the planet that has chosen to do the dumbest things. So if you feel like you've been working really hard towards something, there's something that you really, really want, there's a goal, an aspiration, a dream, and you feel like all of this effort has been put into it, and you know that you move through inspired action, right? You're in a place where you know, okay, I've established the foundation, right? I've established the foundation that when it comes in, it has a place to live. When the energy comes in, the energy has a place to sit. I know I've done everything that needed to be done in order to support this goal. And you feel like it's still not happening. Consider whether or not you are in a place where you are forcing two sticks together. And if you can assess that that is what you are doing, then that means that you're now in the spot of your life, the time in the journey, right? The part of the process where it's now time for you to allow life to unfold through spontaneity, because that's how it likes to do it. And simply allow spontaneous combustion to occur and not be tied to when it happens, how it happens. Understand that spontaneous combustion could occur tomorrow or a year from now, and be okay with that. Because when a wildfire burns, it burns hot, it burns bright, and it burns long.